How do you define customer loyalty?
Loyalty can help you acquire a new customer, get a customer to spend more, get the customer to stay longer. Loyalty does work, and it can work if you get it right. And if you get it wrong, if you apply it in the wrong way, then...
David Parsons is an award-winning expert in customer loyalty and the CEO and co-founder of Ellipsis, a consultancy helping global brands optimize engagement through customer science. He's worked with names like Audi, Shell, eBay, Visa, and Australia's major banks.
If you only did loyalty really well, you still would not be able to grow your brand. Loyalty plays an important role, but it's not everything.
How have these brands outplayed each other when it comes to customer loyalty?
In the case of Virgin, they're not as big as Qantas, they haven't been in the market as long. The way we think about it is like, if you're going to play Brazil in something, don't choose football. There's this concept called goal gradient theory. The closer you are to receiving something, the harder you work. If you're almost at your flight redemption or you're almost at gold status, you're like, what do I need to do to get there? You've got an intangible virtual currency that is worth more in the customer's mind than their own hard-earned dollars.
Are loyalty programs strategically mapped to try to drive people through a structure?
Definitely. We just can't tell any of the customers that, okay? They won't like it.
This episode is brought to you by Wix Studio. So to kick things off here, for businesses stuck thinking that loyalty programs are just points and prizes, how do you define customer loyalty?
Loyalty is a human thing. We're loyal to our partners and our family, and we look for loyalty in others. It's an emotion and a behaviour. It's an outcome often. It's something that we look for that is a trait that is observed. But it's made its way into business and into commerce and into from the human behaviour, I guess, between humans into the way in which humans interact with brands. And so loyalty marketing it's a relatively new phenomenon in the broader kind of consumer economy, and we have a great time working it all out. You're putting consumer psychology and behavioural economics and a whole lot of other stuff into the way in which businesses think about their commercial performance of their business. So, with all of that said, in the context of a relationship between a brand and a customer, loyalty is ultimately customers spend more, they stay for longer, they talk positively about the brand, and they do in a very simple sense. They have some sort of preference for shopping with or using or buying that brand's products and services when they're in the category. So it's a great topic. Who doesn't want loyal customers?
How would you rate or measure what is or constitutes a loyal customer?
Well, that's that in and of itself is sometimes major projects that we do. It's like what makes a customer loyal. If you look at it very simply, there's kind of two types of loyalty people sort of like to think about. There's emotional loyalty. There's how customers feel about a brand, how they might answer a survey, or who are you most loyal to. It turns up, and you're getting a bit deeper here. It turns up in the way in which humans and customers create the mental models that they link to the categories that they shop in. And brand building is really important to be able to build that emotional loyalty. So, we want customers to have a strong emotional connection to our brands. When I go overseas, I always fly Qantas. I would never leave CBA. They're my favourite bank. They helped me buy my first house. There's a whole lot of emotional connections that lead to a form of loyalty, but we can't just rely on that. Businesses are also looking for the second type of loyalty, which is behavioural loyalty. How do customers behave when it comes to spending their money? And so we're looking for both, really. We want all of the customer's wallet. We want all of the behavioural loyalty. They only ever shop with Woolworths or, I only buy my jackets from MJ Bale. But we also want emotional loyalty, which is we've built those mental models and that brand preference. So, I think the behavioural loyalty turns up in the P&L, and emotional loyalty is much more forward-looking, it's much more predictive. Next time this customer's in the category, and we've helped them build those mental models that build mental availability and brand preference. We know that next time they're in our category, as long as we're there for them, make it easy, then we'll get both.
How do you define the difference between behavioral and emotional? Because I guess they could interlink a little bit, but how do you really divide the two?
Look, I think behavioural loyalty is much more transactional.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like you said in the P&L.
It's buy something, book something, spend something.
There's an action.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Emotional loyalty is much more about it's about attitude and intent, and it's about it's about how the mental models that customers build that connect to the category that you operate within. So it's a bit more complex. This is where we need to ultimately we spend marketing dollars to build mental availability, which is connected to emotional loyalty. It's a lot harder to win when it comes to emotional loyalty because marketing budgets are finite. Consumers are complex. They're exposed to lots of different stimulus. So I think that you need to have both. I think we really ascribe to some of the stuff that's come out of Ehrenberg Bass, which is brands grow because you build mental availability through branding and through finding lots of category entry points.
So when you say mental availability, what do you mean?
Yeah, so mental availability really is, there's a whole lot of debate and a lot of academia and a lot of focus in the marketing industry right now around how do you think about marketing? How do you think about growing your brand? There's always been a lot of points of view out there around how do you most wisely spend your marketing dollars. There's the concept of long and short, brand building over the long term versus shorter term activations. Byron Sharp would say that we need to build mental availability, which is building the mental models and the mental structures that associate the brand that we have to the buying need when that arises in the customer's life. That's mental availability.
So, for example, if I'm in a retail outlet and I was explaining this to someone recently, I was looking for a new TV just because I wanted to watch F1. So I was looking at the TV section and I'm like, you have these options, these options, these options. You got, Sony, you've got Panasonic, you've got all these other brands. And I remember just looking at all the stats and the data and just getting overwhelmed, like, man, which TV do I get? Because if I'm going to buy a big one, it's going to be a good one. And I want to make sure I get the best possible, FPS and all the rest of it. And I just remember going through my mind, the first thing was like, I experienced overwhelm. Then the second thing is I went back to familiarity. I was like, okay, I know Sony, I know Panasonic. The third step I went through cognitively was like, okay, cool. Like I'm going to go back to size, which is I want a big one. And then I looked at price. But I imagine not everyone had the same sequence. So when you're looking at the behavioral models of the steps someone has to go through to make a purchase, how do you guys analyze that for a big company?
There's a lot to unpack there. Right?
Let's go down the rabbit hole,
There's path to purchase, right? There's there's considerations. And the category, categories, there's variations by category. When it comes to TV, I think it's quite like price drives some of that decision quite a lot. The technical specifications. I mean, people have worked out with TVs, they all come out of similar factories, right? So there is a brand element to it. And in our world, there's lots of ways to think about customer behaviour. We have our philosophy, which we call customer science, and we're very data driven. We actually pay more attention to behavioural outcomes and behavioural loyalty, what do customers do, as opposed to what they say. And So we start with behavioural data. We collect as much information as we can about the customer and the business and the relationship, and we have a whole lot of statistical techniques and IP that we apply to that to be able to unpack what creates the behaviour that we're observing. We would then apply other forms of customer insights, research and focus groups and other studies that are more qualitative to that, and that gives you the full picture. It allows you to unpack, what customers say around what drives their preference, but then it allows you to look at what actually happened in reality.
Do you find that there's a disparagement between what customers say and what they do?
Massively, hugely. There's a thing called the say-do gap.
Really?
Yeah, I say this and I do that, and they're different. That's the say-do gap, and it turns up all the time. And loyalty is really, really interesting. So when you do a survey about loyalty, it is actually probably the say-do gap is at its most pronounced, because we would all answer surveys like we are rational beings, like we are very smart and we don't do anything irrational. We would always, we manage our money well. We don't accumulate debt on our credit cards. We always buy the smartest choice when it comes to certain things. But then you look at the behaviour and it's very different. And you say, well, what's driving this? It's the emotion. It's emotional loyalty. Actually, we're not rational. We answer surveys rationally, but we act sometimes irrationally. And it turns up in loyalty the best, right? You could get a cheaper flight with Jetstar, or you could pay a lot more just to collect your Qantas points. And people say, I'm going with Qantas because, I didn't really like that flight time, and there was all these excuses. But it's really like, I would say that I'm always smart with my money, but at the end of the day, we can get customers to behave in irrational ways, and that's what we're looking for. Otherwise, all brands would be the same. Pricing would have to be the cheapest. There's got to be intangible factors that come into these relationships. So when it comes to loyalty research, if you asked people or your customers what sort of loyalty program they wanted through research, they would tell you the cheapest price, best specifications, the best deal, all quite rational answers. But when it comes then to how consumers respond to programs and propositions, and more broadly how they act in general, what we find is that they don't act that way.
Right. Okay.
And this is a bit of a Steve Jobs phenomenon, right? If he didn't ask people if they wanted an iPhone, right? He built it and he said, "Hey, what do you think?" So that's in our business. We're spending a lot of time helping banks and retailers and airlines and insurance companies and entertainment businesses, and they're looking for advice in terms of how do we engage customers, how do we build those mental models that we're looking for, how do we differentiate ourselves. And so we've got to be a bit careful how we go about that, because if we just ask customers, we'd be answering to their rational views of the world. And the trick here is to be able to balance rational thinking with irrational thinking in terms of coming up with programs that inspire behaviour change.
Business owners, if you're stuck using one platform for every project, you're probably stuck in a growth bottleneck. More clients means more hires, which just adds noise and cuts into profits. To break the loop, you need flexible tools that don't stretch your resources. Wix Studio is a smart addition to your business toolkit. Intuitive by design, your team can quickly master the platform and focus on the work that matters the most. Then keep up the momentum with a built-in management tool, a unified dashboard, reusable assets, and a Figma plugin that turns static design into launch-ready websites. With robust native business solutions like bookings, e-commerce, and events, you can take any project at any scale without the added cost of third-party plugins. Plus, Wix Studio is a low-maintenance platform, meaning you can redirect the client budget towards real growth initiatives. Think more value for clients, steady income streams, and stronger relationships. To get started, simply go to wix.com/studio. What's one of the weirdest things you've found with irrational buying behavior?
With rational?
Rational or irrational, or maybe a disparagement.
There's classic stories out there, and I've done it. I booked an expensive flight that I didn't need because I was one short of getting a status upgrade into platinum. can't remember what the price was. Maybe it was $500. I mean, I could have bought lounge access for the year for the same amount. That's the main thing that you're getting, right? You're
But
getting
you
into the
wanted
lounge.
that. You wanted the dopamine
I
hit.
wanted the status, man. You know what I mean? I was like, it was important to me to kind of, and so people do this, like they take flights that are not necessary, or they'll buy really expensive airfares just to kind of get that next level of earning or accumulation or status. That's totally irrational. No one would say that in a survey, that they would sort of waste their time and money to sort of get an intangible sort of recognition uplift.
I can imagine someone like submitting like, I did this because I just wanted the dopamine hit.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And we see it all the time. And I think that brands, if you look at those high margin brands, brands with really good margins, in the beauty space, in the cosmetic space, in the fashion and the apparel space, their cost of sale, their cost of doing business in terms of the manufacturing the product, it's all very similar to much sort of lower cost, lower margin operators. And what they're really good at is they build a lot of value into the intangibility of things like brand and reputation and quality and those sort of things. So they do it really well. They want customers to feel like it's worth paying extra for something because of that intangibility, as opposed to, say, a rational sort of answer.
I had seen a statistic around Luxottica, which makes most of the glasses in the world. I think like 76% of the glasses frames in the world are made in this one factory. Yet the disparagement between, the cheap glasses and the expensive ones are massive. Obviously, they probably use different acrylics and materials and things of that nature, but it's the same factory and a different brand. So when you talk about this gap, if we're operating in a market where everyone's kind of spending the same money on a beauty products, but one brand's making 10x what the rest of the brands are making, how do they start to actually cultivate a loyal fan base? Like, what are some of the key fundamental things that a brand should be considering when they're doing that?
It's really interesting. I think it depends on the category as well. Like, I think part of it is, in sort of more utilitarian categories like, insurance and grocery and some other retail categories. The factors are things like, price and location and service, and they're hygiene factors.
What do you mean by hygiene?
Look, they're, all retailers, and this is a bit different for other types of, manufacturers, but all retailers generally worked out, and the kind of, the rules of thumb for retailing is the top 4 or 5 factors when it comes to purchasing decisions are things like, location. Are your stores in the right location, or are you easy to shop online? Price always matters a lot. Service is important. Range. And then things like, loyalty benefits come in. Is it a good loyalty program, and what benefits do I get? And, you put those things together, and then you look at them, and they rank sometimes differently depending upon, like right now, in Australia and most markets, cost of living means everyone's really looking for value. So value is like number one across the board in a lot of sectors. That's what's driving people's decision. I'm happy to move away from a brand I've always shopped with because I get a better deal over here.
Okay.
But in other times, it's different, right?
So you have to be aware of the climate or the weather of the market.
Yep.
And that can fluctuate how people behave.
That's right. But outside of those types of industries, I think it's a fascinating challenge, which is how do luxury brands and how do other brands build that differentiation? How do they build premiumness in the offer? How do they build distinctiveness? I think one of the things that matters a lot, and there's a lot of debate here around, like, what's more important, being different or being distinctive?
Right.
And I certainly believe in the distinctiveness better. You shouldn't be different for the sake of being different. I think that you can be sort of similar but distinctive, as opposed to, having to be different for different sake. But what I see is brands that do this well, they tap into and stay connected to culture. They actually, like, those brands that you sort of, I think, referenced around their premium and high margin. They're cool brands, and that's a really, like, intangible thing. How do you build? How do you connect into culture? How do you build something that's cool? You can differentiate it through the product. Like Apple's Apple, and Tesla for a while there, and there's a bunch of other brands that are cool products. But they're really cool brands, and that's where it comes down to marketing, right? And so traditional marketing was all about building brand and building differentiation and standing for something with customers. Loyalty fits into that. If you look at how brands are using loyalty now, they're actually pulling it forward into their brand CVP.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you think about the relationship that you have with an airline, for example, you don't think about the plane, you think about the frequent flyer benefits.
Yes.
Like that's the platform for the relationship that we have, with some of these brands. And this is, I think, where it's really interesting in loyalty, how, it always sat sort of a bit separate from the brand or a bit behind, say, the brand, but increasingly what we're seeing in a lot of our clients' industries, loyalty and membership and subscription type propositions are becoming almost like the front door. They're becoming like at the front of the relationship that a brand will have with its consumers.
Okay. So over time, you feel like it's moved from the back to the front.
Definitely, yeah.
And do you have an example of this or a reference?
I think like if you look at, say, take Commonwealth Bank, crazy valuation. No one can explain, why their valuation is so different to every other bank. But they've done a really good job of creating these sort of like customer flywheels. They're connecting their consumer retail bank customers to their business and corporate bank customers through loyalty and reward mechanisms. They've got credit card programs and they've got other cashback programs. They've got a unified recognition program called Yellow. And so they're actually, like, you go to the website now and they're actually, one of the hero benefits of being a CBA customer is you get all these benefits because you're in this kind of recognition program. And the pitch is really interesting to the customer. It's like you get better deal, you get better value, you get better service, you get better everything because you give us more of your business and we'll recognise you better. But the proposition to their business bank and their commercial bank and their enterprise customers is, hey, we've got a big audience here, and if you bank with us, we'll help you sell more to our big base of retail customers. So they've got this really nice flywheel connecting the retail bank customers to the commercial and business bank customers. And it just creates this massive kind of like flywheel of value.
Now, when you were talking before about, people's irrational brain and their kind of rational brain where they're kind of at odds with each other and there's a bit of a gap between what they say and what they do, how can someone start to identify what the irrational part of their market might be?
Yeah, really interesting. I think I think this is where customer-centric ways of, like the philosophy of how do we think about product and services development. Traditionally, everything's been more product-led. Build great products and then go find people to sell them to. And, it was like my business partner, Tim Tyler, who's a real legend of the CRM loyalty and customer-centric customer experience industry. He worked with Don Peppers and Martha Rogers for a while, and they kind of invented like this concept of, one-to-one marketing, where you start with the customer and then you work back from there and you say, well, what needs, I've worked hard to acquire a customer, what other needs can I be meeting? And so, when we think about then, like, how do we connect, the rational and irrational sort of parts of our brains? How do we, build those mental models that drive brand preference? I think we need to start with the customer and work our way back into the business. And that's where things like, value proposition canvases are quite interesting if you're familiar with those.
No, please do.
So we use these in our strategy development as one of the kind of many tools that we use. Value proposition canvases are quite interesting. You got to start by identifying different customer segments, and that in and of itself is not always easy to do. How do we sort of think about the types of customers that we have and group them? And we do a lot of sort of data science on that, clustering style analysis to be able to kind of determine, what's really important is customer value. So, what are the segments or clusters of what are segments or clusters of customers look like, ranked from most valuable all the way down. And then you start to say, okay, well, how do we sort of define those? But the step one is to identify your customer segment, and then your customer segments. Then what we want to do is we want to look at, what are the jobs that they're looking to get done? What are the pain points in that experience, and what are the gain creators that we could bring into that? And so there's a fair bit of work that goes into mapping that and identifying it. And the other side of the canvas is the business canvas from the customer side. And the business side would be looking at what products and services do we have, or what products or services might we develop to meet those jobs to be done, and then how do you create experiences or solutions to the pains and the gains. And it's a nice little model. It forms part of a broader kind of strategy canvas that we often use, but it helps you take a customer-centric view toward product and services development and experience design.
So if we take an industry like, I guess, airlines, and you have a look at something like Virgin compared to something like Qantas, they both arguably have the same hardware, the same technology, the same staff expertise, the same terminal, the same airport, the same qualifications for the pilot, the same kind of food that rolls out. When you're in a space where your competitors are arguably doing the same thing, so like if you're a law firm or you're a financial broker or you're a real estate or what have you, and you're across the board, that you really don't have a lot of room for differentiation. How have these brands outplayed each other when it comes to strategy around customer loyalty?
Well, I think loyalty then becomes a really interesting new set of levers to bring in to help brands where there is that commoditization and undifferentiation. In that duopoly context, if you think about Woolworths and Coles, if you think about Qantas and Virgin, they don't really like the other player to be good at something that they're not good at. There tends to be a lot of table stakes that needs to be matched. And so we see a lot of, I wouldn't say it's imitation, but you see a lot of moves by each player to ensure that they're not worse off on something that customers care about. Which is why if one of them launches a loyalty program, so does the other guy. And that's been pretty good for us because now everyone's got loyalty programs everywhere. But the problem is most of them don't know if they're working properly. You can't just leave these things static. They've got to improve, and so there's a lot of focus on how do you make them better. But I think this is where it comes down to where do you want to play and where can you win? In the case of Virgin, they're smaller than Qantas, and we're good mates with these guys. They're not as big as Qantas. They haven't been in the market as long. They haven't spent as much money, building the brand and building great government relations and doing all this. Qantas has got a massive head start. Their frequent flyer program is one of the most profitable globally. So when Virgin comes along and says, "Well, we want to be able to compete in the market. We've worked out where we want to play." The loyalty program is quite important in that, but they can't out Qantas when it comes to their program. They'll always be, if they try to do the same thing that Qantas is doing, that Qantas will always say, "Yeah, but we're a bit bigger. Yeah, we're a bit better. We're a bit," you know what I mean? So you can't compete on the same dimensions. And I think that the way we think about it is like if you're going to play Brazil in something, like don't choose football, right? Pick another sport where you can win. Yeah. And that's where I think Virgin and some of these other brands that are in that environment that you talk about, they do a really good job of meeting the table stakes that customers care about. If they need points, they're good points. You can redeem them for great rewards, and you might have status benefits because that's important. But what you're trying to find are areas that a bigger competitor can't match you at, that customers will care about, that make you distinctive, that give you some competitive advantage. And it's an easy thing to say. It's hard to do. But sometimes you've got a tyranny of scale. Like if you've got really rich reward seats on offer and you force Qantas to match you on that, it costs them a lot more money just because of their scale. So this is the nuance when it comes to loyalty strategy and proposition development that I guess it's why we exist, because that's a big part of what we do is we help big businesses work through the complexity when it comes to how do we build something that works commercially, but it's also tied back to our brand, differentiated from competitors, but still something that clients want. You put all that together, it gets really fascinating.
I think it's incredibly interesting how, a company that might have less resources then another can kind of outwit or outsmart or outmaneuver, not directly, but indirectly through other means. When you look at other brands, like if we look at Woolworths versus Coles, do you see any disparagement there, or is it the same kind of thing because they're a duopoly, they're just trying to match each other's table stakes?
Yeah, look, that's another highly competitive sector, isn't it? I don't think it's true anymore, but you know, what was said was that 9 out of 10 customers or households cross shop between those two brands.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're not trying to win the customer. If you're an energy company, so you're AGL, once a year you get a shot at the customer, right? Because there's like the price of energy goes up, or the renewal comes through, or there's some moment where the customer's like, oh, I probably should shop this around. So that's your moment. So that creating category entry points when the customer might think of alternatives to AGL, if they're an AGL customer, is very different to if you're competing.
Because you're making daily decisions versus
that's
car
right.
insurance is annual, electricity is annual.
The frequency matters a lot. Yeah, the style of the relationship matters a lot. So, you know, in a grocery context, you're fighting for every trip. In fuel, you're fighting for every trip. Because when you get to like 3/4 of the way empty, you're like, oh, I better get some petrol at some point. Oh, well, there's one there. I'll just go now. That's one type of behaviour, isn't it? The other one is, oh, no, I get my Qantas points at BP, so I'm going to wait until I find a BP. So that's a good investment from BP, even though it might be a bit expensive. They always know that the customer will wait to find one of their stores before they fill up. So in a grocery context, as you mentioned, I think where loyalty comes in is that you tap into some of the consumer and loyalty psychology. Things like loss aversion matters a lot. So if you're going to miss out on something because you change behaviour, you behave in a particular way. You know, the closer you are towards a reward, there's this concept called goal gradient theory, which is, you know, the closer you are to receiving something, the harder you work. You notice that? Like if you're almost at your like flight redemption or you're almost at gold status, you're like, what do I need to do to get there? And if you've just redeemed and you got no points, or you've just been upgraded into a tier and you got a year, then you go, I can take it easy now. I don't really have to do anything. I can just worry about that later. So, you know, this whole, all of the consumer psychology and behavioural economic factors come into this as well.
Are loyalty programs strategically mapped to kind of have these junctions or these checkpoints to try to drive people through a structure?
Definitely.
Yeah. And how do you think of that? Like, so if you
we just can't tell any of the customers that, okay? They won't like it.
Metaphorically speaking, if you
right.
were to create one, how does that work? Because I understand, like, for example, I've already put my credit card in. What's another $15? But then that turns a $200 purchase into a $700 purchase just because you've incentivized
those little nudges along the way, isn't it?
Nudge them along the way.
Yeah.
So, like, how do these big brands leverage that kind of behavior?
They learn a lot,
metaphorically.
Don't they? They learn a lot from people like casinos, and you know those like seriously, these are all deliberate tactics to get the customer to pay attention for longer and to upsell them and to maximise share of wallet. And you know, when you get the designs right and you get the mechanics right, these sorts of treatments and offers and incentives, they have a massive impact on changing customer behaviour. So in that example, if that's true, your ATV went from 200 to 700 because of, you know, these extra nudges. And if you do that in a smart way, your margin increases significantly as well. You could offer for an extra, you know, for that next purchase, you could offer a really rich discount, or you could offer other benefits, right? That loyalty type mechanics offer you beyond just price. And so when you get this stuff right, you're tapping into, you know, relatively predictable consumer psychology that results in much better commercial outcomes in terms of, you know, spend stimulation at better margins. It's just, you know, you're getting into complexity here because you've got digital experience design, you've got product strategy, you've got marketing and promotional levers all working in concert, not all customers are the same. So, you got to be able to personalize, and you got to be able to work out what's going to work for your types of customers that you have. There's also brand implications here, because some brands will never discount. So how do we kind of do things that don't look like a discount? And so it's actually, I think a lot of the loyalty and reward mechanics that come out of traditional loyalty constructs, earning points and redeeming them, are now turning up in the experience that you just described. It's not a loyalty program per se, but you're connecting incentives to behaviours that to drive the commercial outcomes you're looking for. That's what we're looking for in loyalty ultimately. Yes, we want brand affinity. Yes, we want emotional connection. Yes, we want advocacy. Yes, we want those mental structures and mental availability developed. But ultimately, as I said before, you do that well, it's sell more to more customers more often for longer at better margins. And hey, who doesn't want that?
Who doesn't want that?
That's right.
Yo, my name's Dane Walker, and I am disgustingly obsessed with branding. I had to figure out a way to do branding every single day, so I branded myself. Then, I started my agency, Rival. And hired a team of branding mavericks hell-bent on creating brands so good that they'll make your competition shit their pants. So here's the thing, you want your brand to go viral, and Rival makes brands go viral. That's why we're offering you a free 30-minute branding session to get an expert's opinion. If you don't believe me, the proof is in the pudding. Here's what clients have to say about Rival.
Rival is trusted by brands like Nutrition Warehouse, Light My Bricks, and Vumi.
So if you want to absolutely smoke the competition and make your brand go viral, hit the link below and book in your free 30-minute branding session.
Now, if you look at traditional systems, I guess, I'm thinking back to my mother. When I would grow up, she would clip coupons out of the mail. So did my grandmother. These points, these perks, these programs, are they enough anymore, or are brands needing to branch out and get more creative in order to get the benefits?
Our view, observe what's going on in the market. I think modern forms of loyalty and incentive and sort of variations to those sort of promotional programs have proliferated because they work when you get it right. Yes, we have to have good products. Yes, we have to price them well. Yes, we have good experience. We have to build good brands so that we can be distinctive and we can stand for something and we can attract premium. But ultimately, over the last, I would say probably 30, 40 years, we've trained customers. Like customers are, we humans, we adapt, don't we? We learn. We've worked out actually, there's a game to be played here. And so if I play the game, there's the brand gets something out of it from me. I spend more, I buy more often from them, and I expect something back. So if you look at airlines, big grocery retailers, lots of apparel brands. In fact, most kind of industry sectors, they're all experimenting with these sort of new types of propositions. With AGL Energy, an Australian energy company, you get Netflix with the Netflix plan. And why do they do that? Well, they buy Netflix wholesale rates, they offer it to customers, and those customers, they stay for a lot longer because if they switch off the energy, then they have to go through the hassle of doing the Netflix on its own. If you look at Walmart and a lot of the big UK grocery retailers and a lot of the Aussie grocery retailers, they've built paid subscription programs and member pricing and a whole lot of those sort of propositions into traditional grocery, and so it's interesting. And I think what's happening is it's proliferating into the mid-market. These big guys have the resources and the capabilities to be, and they're experimenting with this stuff. A lot of our, retail clients and a lot of other clients, they're saying, hey, how do we take those learnings and bring it into our business?
How can someone who's, I guess, early in business or, established their first 1 or 2 million, and maybe they're an e-commerce or maybe they're a service-based provider, how can they start implementing this stuff into their businesses and into their services?
Well, I think at the extreme, some of these businesses that start, they actually create a business because of some of these models. So if you think about, let me think of a good example here. there's a quirky little company that's disrupted the whole sock industry. Okay, let's pick a real
Let's go.
quirky one, right? And their whole business, right, is called the sockscription.
Okay.
Okay, and so if you think about like paid loyalty programs, what they've said is, well, rather than being a paid loyalty program, we're going to be a subscription style retailer of socks. And what they're doing is they're targeting, blokes, because guess what? We hate going sock shopping. Don't
I
we?
hate sock shopping.
No, man. Like we just do it. We do it in one big go.
Yeah.
And then
I usually buy 40 pairs.
Yeah.
And then they all go ready at the same time.
And the key is to buy the same ones, so you never have to match pairs. They all just match, right? So the sockscription is you sign up, and you pick the frequency, and you always just get like a regular refresh of socks.
I'm sold.
And it's always on, right? And you're not really worrying about price, and it's just linked to your card. If you think about the lifetime value that they can and the recurring revenue that they get out of that, it's huge. So that's a startup that has built a business model around subscription-based businesses and how they turn up in loyalty. So it's interesting. I think it allows us to rethink the type of business model that we can bring to market. The other thing that's really interesting, we run a business called Loyalty Central. Think about it as the Google homepage for loyalty solutions. In Australia, there's about 190 platforms selling into loyalty managers. The Australian loyalty industry is about $8 billion. Maybe 80 to 85% of it makes its way into the hands of customers through rewards and gift cards and discounts and promotions. But there's $1.5 billion to $2 billion at play in infrastructure. And this is what's really interesting. Like my business, we kind of invented the loyalty consulting category when we started 11 years ago. And over that last, say, 11 years or so, there's been this proliferation of capabilities that have been built out as the kind of like, the loyalty management ecosystem was like pulled apart and specialist players entered and innovated. And what that means is even if you're a relatively small business, you can actually get world-class, really innovative capabilities today because of it's never been a better time to buy the sort of capabilities you need to run these sort of things.
So if someone's, let's say, an established business, let's just pick e-com as a category. You've got a great example now with sockscription, which I'm going to sign up for. What are some of the fundamental pillars that people should look at? Like, what are the different ways by which someone can inject loyalty?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of our briefs are we've got a loyalty problem. So a loyalty problem is we think our customers are churning too much.
So they'll buy once, but they won't come back.
Yeah, they're coming in once, and like lots of categories have high one-time rates. But the way in which loyalty problems turn up is there's headroom in the customer base that we're missing out on because the customer is buying from our competition. They're not coming back. We've got diminishing metrics around customer value. And so they say, hey, we've got a loyalty problem. We need a loyalty solution. And so the danger is to just assume that a loyalty program is the answer to that. It often might not be. There could be product, price, service. There could be a whole range of other issues that are causing this loyalty problem. So we do a lot of diagnosis to ensure that the customer really understands what's driving the problem and then fix that, right? And if a loyalty strategy or a loyalty solution or program is the best answer to that problem, then we then would help a client develop an appropriate plan for them. And the simple steps are, if you take that customer-centric philosophy that I mentioned before, start with the customer, work out the behaviours that you're looking to incentivize or change. Then you've got to work out what sort of incentives are available or appropriate to be able to inspire that behaviour change. Then you've got to work out, what sort of value pools is on the table when it comes to that behaviour change. If X amount of customers did one more basket, churned less, whatever that metric looked like, what's that worth? What sort of incentive and infrastructure do I need to run it? Does that business case make sense? And then how do I implement that? So there's a few steps that you need to go through, but what's true about loyalty is best customers will always play. And so you have to get it right, because if you don't, and then you have to change it or you have to pull it away, you're pissing off your best customers first. And so that's where our sort of expertise comes in. We're a bit of a sort of pinch hitter specialist when it comes to working through the diagnoses and the strategy development. But we're also a big insurance policy to make sure that you don't do the worst thing, which is you're trying to fix one problem and you create another one.
So if you have let's say you pick a makeup brand, I don't know who you've worked with, but let's pick someone at the high end and someone at the low end.
Yeah.
You're saying that it could be just a foundation, but one client will spend X, the other client will spend Y, and they're moving the same volume, but one's making way more money because they've established some kind of loyalty program.
And there's probably spending a lot more on marketing, but we work with Estee Lauder globally extensively and across all of their brands. And even within that portfolio of brands, you've got big differences in terms of price and margin, et cetera. Those sort of the programs in those industries and many others actually work best, and the focus is always on heavier buyers, higher value buyers first, and then we work our way down the value tiers to spread more of our loyalty investment once we feel confident that we've locked in our.
Okay, so getting specific, making sure we at least win that cohort, and focus on the next.
And this comes down to the whole Pareto principle in business and in retail.
What's that? Sorry.
So you know about the Pareto principle?
No.
Okay, so a Pareto curve. It looks at the ratio between, in the case of loyalty and customer marketing, it's the ratio of customers to the proportion of customers to the proportion of revenue, and a rule of thumb in some industries is that 80% of our revenue comes from 20% of customers. So, in a really simple sense, I could just focus on those 20% of customers and I will protect 80% of my revenue. And that's where loyalty kind of started out. What do we need to do to protect and preserve our more valuable and high value customers? And if we do that well, we'll always make sure that we've got a large proportion of our revenue protected. The challenge is that the Pareto curves aren't always the same. In some industries, you might have 90% of your revenue coming from 10% of customers, like in wagering and even in credit cards and those sorts of things. So it's a bit easier because you only really need to worry about a smaller percentage of customers to preserve all that revenue. But there's a lot of myths around, the application of Pareto curves and is it really 80-20? What we see more routinely in retail is that about 60% of your revenue comes from around 40% of customers. So you need to be able to work harder at a broader cross section of the customer base. But it's a really I'd encourage anyone who's thinking about their business and like customer loyalty and differences in customer value to start to think about what does their Pareto curve look like? Like how concentrated is value in the customer base? If you're Netflix or a Netflix style company, everyone's kind of similar in terms of value. Loyalty's hard because to make it work, you've got to give a smaller amount of investment back to a lot more customers. Whereas if you've got concentration of value and you've got like a smaller number of customers delivering a lot more of your revenue, well, you've got a bit more leverage and latitude to be able to do something a bit more unique because, those heavy buyers, those more higher value customers are the ones that we need to preserve to be able to, put a bit of a moat around the core part of our business.
Well said. I think it makes sense to me because oftentimes business owners aren't really aware of this stuff. In my case, when I meet people sub $1 million, they're like, when I ask them, who's your target customer? They're like, everyone. Then you look under the hood and you start to realize that, okay, majority of your revenue actually comes from over here. And it's like a shock for people to go, wow, I never thought of it this way. But I can imagine at the top of town, this is common knowledge. And I think for those that are starting a business, they can think of it that way. Coming back to how you were talking about customer loyalty, what are the fundamental steps? Because you have a bit of a process or a framework around which customer, which behaviors, desirability, viability, feasibility. You have the DVF analysis, return on loyalty, and so forth. if you don't mind unpacking that, just to take me through like kind of the process or the framework or the conveyor belt you would take someone through.
Yeah, so there's a lot of acronyms in there.
Take me in, man. Let's go.
Yeah, so you want to go, we'll go into some of this. The steps that we would recommend clients go through when it comes to building out a loyalty strategy ultimately is you got to be really clear on the why. What are the objectives? What's the ambition look like? So a real sort of clear sense of purpose around, what's the opportunity or the problem or the sort of the output that you're looking for. So, we spend a lot of time helping our clients be really clear on the problems that we really want to solve and the priority for those, because otherwise we're trying to do everything, and there might be better things that could answer other challenges or opportunities. When it comes to the process of actually putting a strategy together, that desirability, viability, and feasibility sort of an acronym, DVF, has sort of proliferated now into business. And most people, a lot of corporates would understand what this is. To simplify it, the desirability lens is that CVP customer proposition assessment. It's answering the question that is this thing desirable for our target customers? And so a lot of work goes into developing propositions and campaigns and offers to be able to come up with something that customers are going to respond to and say, yeah, I like that. And so even inside that whole desirability kind of work stream, there's a lot of kind of heavy lifting that goes into the creative and sort of innovative, the innovation and creativity to come up with those sort of scenarios and options. The challenge, of course, is that the most desirable propositions will probably cost you the most. Make the product free. That's extreme, right? That is the most desirable thing you can do, but you go broke, right? You're never going to do it. So that's why we need other kind of guardrails and other perspectives to balance. So
before we move on, like when you say desirability, is that like through price, like you said, or is that also products? Like what exactly could that be?
Well, this is how you set it up. This is defining the guardrails for how we think a customer might perceive the desirability of the proposition or the program.
From their perspective.
Yeah, that's right. And that's where we've got to get into data analysis and data science. We've got to get into a bit of qualitative surveys and focus groups. Like, it's really important that we understand that customer-centric view of what is it that's important to them to be able to stimulate the behaviour change that we're looking for. And if you get that wrong, you end up with propositions that customers don't care about. So even just getting that piece right is critical.
Yeah, otherwise you end up investing money into a program that doesn't work.
Yep.
Doesn't get adopted. Yep. So the next thing you said, viability.
Yeah, so the viability is an economic perspective. So is running and operating and offering this to customers economically viable? And so this is where we look at, and we use, we've got a whole lot of really good IP and, finance, commercial modelling. We've got a whole lot of platform capability and return on loyalty as a distinctive kind of, almost patented capability that really helps us give our clients confidence around how much this is going to cost and where the incremental value pools are in terms of the returns. So the second perspective is we've got a set of propositions or loyalty strategies that we think sort of meet that desirability context. Let's have a look at the economic lens. How much are these things going to cost, and what sort of returns are we going to get? And that helps us say, well, ultimately we want to have the most desirable style propositions that work the best for us economically. So that's why we need. That's two of the three lenses.
And the third one you said, which was feasibility.
Yeah. So feasibility really is how do you actually run and operate this thing? So if we take a hypothetical example, we could have like a wonderful loyalty proposition and construct that looks fantastic when it comes to the economics, really cheap to offer, great returns, but it might mean there's a 3-year investment in new capability and platforms and integrations and systems. And we can't wait that long. So whilst it looks great at the desirability and the viability level, it doesn't pass the feasibility test. And so feasibility is all about like efficient operation of the program and of the loyalty strategy. So It gets really interesting then, because it's like, where do you start? You got to kind of look at all three in concert. You got to we always work with our clients and we say the job here isn't to just, create a 3 to 5 year tech transformation just because you want to be able to do enhancements to your loyalty constructs. Sometimes those things are needed, but we always start by saying, what are you good at and what capabilities do you have today? We sort of start there. It's also really important that you look at the viability context early, cost benefit analysis and value pool modeling. You say, what is there sufficient money out there for us to go after, and what do we think that might cost, and is even that palatable? Have that conversation early, and that's where I think these things working in concert, they give you, I wouldn't say it's like a balance, it's not a balanced scorecard, but it is more of a balanced scorecard in terms of those three perspectives that you got to get right.
Okay. Now, when you're taking the DVF analysis, what kind of data points are you really looking at?
On the desirability front, it's a bit more qualitative, but it turns up more quantitative when you're doing customer testing and research. Our philosophy is that you need to have good customer inputs and insights at the commencement of these things. Are customers happy? What do they care about? What are the category nuances that matter? There's a whole lot of inputs into how we might think about an assessment of desirability as one of the sort of lenses. But we don't ask customers what sort of loyalty programs they want early on. There's sort of almost two steps to that customer testing. There's kind of customer inputs and insights that guide the proposition development, and then there's customer testing of those propositions to be able to refine and optimize. So that there's more, and there's a whole really important layer of behavioural data science there that brings that behavioural analytics in to complement the qualitative. That's how we avoid the say-do gap.
Okay.
Yeah. So you got to put those three things together. That's in desirability.
So then, do you have an example of you actually applying the DVF in a particular case?
Yeah. Well, we use it quite routinely, and it doesn't always turn up exactly like that. I mean, I think a proposition, economic and operating perspective is inherent in all of our work, but we've done quite a bit of work in the health insurance space. Some years ago, we designed a help Medibank bring their proposition to market, and it's a great program. It's distinctive. It's built on some best practices that have come out of really successful propositions like Vitality out of South Africa. But health insurance tough, thin margins, lots of regulation. And all health insurance face into this, which is how do you kind of create value in that relationship? How do you build something that's different from the traditional health insurance model, which is we're here for you when you get sick or something bad happens, but do it in such a way that there's meaningful value on the table for the customer. So, programs like Live Better work really well because they're partly funded by the core brand, and they've got lots of partners in there. And so it's a really desirable proposition. It gives Medibank a lot of distinctiveness when it comes to helping you live better as opposed to helping you get better when you get sick. But they've been running it now for many years. So clearly the economics works. And so this is a good example where there's a whole lot of modelling and data science and actuarial kind of work that goes into the assessment of the affordability of something whilst ensuring that it's something that customers would care about because there's enough money on the table.
And another thing you talk about here is return on loyalty, so ROL. So you have DVF, which we've just unpacked, and the ROL, which is more about the framework or practical way a business can empower confidence in a customer or something of that nature, which you've described. But how would you explain that?
Well, this is our core business. So we've spent, 11 plus years as Ellipsis and then 20 plus years as the principals in the business, really helping our clients get confidence around investments in customers and are they working? And if you think about loyalty in this context of a small part of the broader marketing ecosystem, there's a really big ongoing challenge out there, which is, am I getting the best returns from my marketing spend? And who's got the answer to that with the highest degree of confidence? Not many brands out there. I think that there's a lot of work that goes into marketing mix modeling, that goes into sort of marketing attribution work. There's a lot of misleading and sort of unbiased insights that are often generated. We are working extremely hard to be the world leading kind of providers of insights when it comes to true program performance. And we've got all this amazing team and lots of industry expertise, great IP, loyalty finance and data science, and sort of bringing in a whole lot of really quite contemporary views out of the academic world into this capability. And the reason it's important is as follows. They say that half of your marketing dollars are wasted, but brands just don't know which half, so they just keep spending. Well, our view is that there's actually a lot of loyalty programs that lose money. They just don't know. And this is really fascinating. How do you decide what role the loyalty program had in that next transaction versus all of the other things that you're doing? If you broke a company apart by silo, you've got the brand team that does brand marketing, you've got like social, you've got product development, you've got sort of partnerships, you've got the loyalty team, you've got you've got the retail team. Like you put it all together, then everyone's saying, "Oh, I did that." Right?
Yeah, the sales team
Seriously,
was like, I did that. Marketing are like, we did it.
But you're the
Branding's
CFO
like, "We've done it."
or the CEO. You're sitting there going, well, we're spending all this money across here. What sort of cannibalization's going on? And actually, if we put together all of the revenue and customer value creation across all of those different sort of parts of the ecosystem, my business should be 10 times bigger. Right? Because everyone's bringing that new customer and everyone's responsible for that basket.
So all these different teams are writing these grandiose reports about, look how great we've done.
Yeah.
And it's actually, they're all cannibalizing each other's results.
Well, I think if you add it all together, it doesn't work, it doesn't compute. And this is the problem in loyalty, right? And we see this all the time. You've got big brands that will say to their investors, here's our loyalty program update. The membership's growing, engagement and activity rates are growing. All the loyalty metrics, green, 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 green. And even better, this is the one we love, our members are a lot more valuable than our non-members. So we've got a great loyalty asset here. Oh, and by the way, here's our financial results, and sales are down, profits down, but that's disconnected from this great loyalty story. And we look at that and we go, if that loyalty program was really working so well, wouldn't you have better business results? So what's going on here? Is it that the metrics are off, or is there something more nuanced going on? And it could be either, by the way. Loyalty isn't the only thing that, if you only did loyalty really well, you still would not be able to grow your brand. There is a lot of other things that you've got to be able to do well to grow your brand. Loyalty plays an important role, but it's not everything. So it's normal in some ways that you might have really positive metrics in the loyalty program, and you might have businesses that are struggling a bit because they're struggling to acquire. And loyalty is not the best place to acquire customers, even though you can. So when you look at that, you say, okay, well, I can see how that might make sense. But then if you actually have a look at all of the loyalty measurement and loyalty reporting, what we see is it's very hard to do proper attribution of the role that the loyalty program played in generating incremental value versus those other all those other things that brands are doing. And so that's where return on loyalty comes in. It's the attribution solution to give program operators the clearest sense of the true ROI on their loyalty program.
So if we take a business, let's take a fashion brand, an e-com store, and let's say a customer's come in once, you've spent $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a month to attain new business. Then your objective is, how do I keep the good ones I've collected? So you're spending a certain portion of your budget to get the awareness that you even exist in the first place. They interact with your brand, they make a purchase. Loyalty is more about how do we get them to come back a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth time. Another famous example of this might be like Ferrari. You can't just go buy a new one. You have to go buy a second-hand one, which means that the second-hand ones retain their value.
Yeah.
They have this really interesting...
Are you talking from first-hand experience here?
No, I wish I
had.
had.
By the way, I heard that, but
I've heard about this, and I don't personally have one. But if you think about it from an e-com perspective, okay, we're spending all this money to get the client, but we might not be keeping them happy. And do you see that a lot of brands are failing in this way? They're sleeping on their loyalty programs?
Yeah, I do. I think there's a huge amount. We put most of our dollars into acquisition.
Is that a problem for a business?
No. As long as it's manageable, as long as your cost of acquisition is manageable and it's...
But what are the potential risks of just putting all your eggs in that one basket?
Well, the risk is that you spend a lot of money to get the customer in the front door, and then you miss an opportunity to get them to spend more and stay longer with you. And that's where loyalty and membership and subscription-based propositions work quite well. You put the customer into your ecosystem, into your flywheel. You give them reasons to subscribe and tell you who they are, and you give them better deals and offers, and you can personalize the experience, and all those things add up to a higher likelihood that the customer will stay and they will spend more. So that's why these types of things were invented in the first place, because airlines and banks and now retailers and every other sector have worked out, actually, hey, we've done all the heavy lifting to get the customer in the first place. Why don't we? How might these sort of constructs help us keep them for longer? But you can't just rely on the customers that you have to grow. Some of them, there's always churn in a customer base. So we need to constantly replenish our customer base with new customers coming in who often start low value. The first time we see the customer, they don't often become a high value customer. Over time, you grow the value of the customer relationship. So we've got to get the balance right between spending money to get new customers to come in, which is really important, but also ensuring that we're looking after the customers we have. And as a CMO, anyone that's looking after leadership of the customer and customer outcomes in a business, it's a constant challenge, which is how do I balance this investment in new customers versus the existing customers I have. And the simple way to think about this is that you've got to do both well.
Do you find that there's a ratio like 50-50 or 70-30 that tends to appear time and time again?
Yeah, there's a lot of ratios that get put out there. If you look at Bennett and Field, they've got ratios that they would publish. They would say that you got to go 60 long, 40 short, or 70 long, 30 short. Like 70% of my budget in building brand and 30% on promotional activation, and it varies by sector. It's really interesting. People have to be careful how they interpret some of this perspective, because if you're the retailer, if you're Woolworths, you need to act very differently to if you're Nestle, right? But often what gets mixed up is that we apply these sort of rules of or laws of marketing to a Mars bar, which is quite different to the shelf that's owned by Woolies. So, and this is where it's really interesting, because loyalty is really topical. Some people hate the word and everyone's seems to love it at the moment. Everyone's investing a lot of money, but some people out there would say, loyalty programs are a waste of money. You shouldn't waste your money doing that. You should just focus on, more traditional forms of brand building and promotional activation. And that's 100% right in the case of maybe a CPG company or an FMCG company. But it's wrong, it's flawed in the context of a lot of other categories where you are retailing and you are wanting to have a direct relationship to the customer and those other benefits. So, I think this is where what we're seeing, which is great, is there's a lot more data, there's a lot more academia coming into it, but I don't think you can apply generic rules to different industries and different sectors, because the dynamics are always different.
And you mentioned there that people would say that these types of programs are a waste of time. Why are they naive in saying that? Like, what are they not seeing?
Look, in a certain context, they're right.
Let's take the case that they're not.
The perspective that loyalty programs don't make you money it's invalidated by all of the comprehensive analysis and modelling and assessment that has been done across a whole lot of consumer industries that have invested heavily in loyalty, and the returns are scientifically proven. So loyalty does work, and it can work if you get it right. And if you get it wrong, if you apply it in the wrong way, then the inverse of that happens. You lose money. So I think the context is really important. But the value pools are quite clear when you look at it. If you think about it simply, loyalty can help you acquire a new customer. They can help you get a customer to spend more, and that's a bigger basket or an extra trip or a combination. They can help you get the customer to stay longer. They can help you improve your margin because you're not relying as much on price versus other types of incentive, points, etc. And they also help you build new businesses that unlock even extra sources of revenue, such as retail media networks.
So do you have some specific cases of these programs that you've built that our listeners could implement into their service-based businesses or their product-based businesses, like some fundamental like structure where it's like, make sure you guys are thinking of these things, doing these things? Are there any like crucial pillars that people should keep in mind?
Yeah, look, I think program type and loyalty models quite important. If you're going to build your own program, you got to invest in building something that customers care about, which means that you need to. It's a long-term pursuit, and you have to be prepared to invest to educate customers and drive awareness so that they care about it. And we all get offered lots of loyalty programs to join all the time. And in some cases, you'd be crazy if you didn't, right? You go in there and it's like, oh, if you're a member, you get that for $10 cheaper. It's like, oh, I'll sign up. Now, I didn't. The membership program didn't generate that sale. They just gave away $10 worth of margin. So I don't know if that's a wise way to do it. But we're all in loads and loads of programs. And so, and this comes back to return on loyalty for us. What's really important is that we're spending money in these things in a way that generates incremental returns. We have to get the customer to care about it. And so this is where, if you're thinking about loyalty and you're thinking about doing it, you got to be able to think about that sort of feasibility lens. You got to think about, am I prepared to stand something up and operate it and go on that journey to put something in place that could be quite complex, or should I start quite simple? And so this is where there's a whole lot of different program types and models that brands could investigate and deploy.
If we were to keep it like, simplify the process, and you were to say like these are like kind of the unspoken laws of a loyalty program, but if we were to keep it simple, like what are some of the easiest light lifts that someone could do?
That's good. Well, number one, connected to the core experience. It should be connected as closely as possible to the relationship that you're offering. We should try to collect and use the data wisely, so learn more about our customers. We often need to partner for growth, which means leverage other companies' assets and audiences. And really importantly, we need to allocate our loyalty investment really carefully. We can't spend money on everybody. So work out where the value is and focus on something that unlocks that spend.
So if you were to say, okay, like a famous example that Paul Waddy shared on this podcast, which was G'd Up, where like if you buy this, you go on the draw to win a helicopter trip.
Yeah.
And, they sold out of millions of dollars of product in a matter of hours. You're saying that sometimes, as a business, you have to go, well, which cohort within our ranks would we invest our money in? And then what experience does that cohort want from us? And then how do we give it to them in a way that's cost effective, but incentivizes more loyalty?
Yep. And that's a great example. Quite simple. I mean, relatively expensive, but when you're generating millions of dollars of incremental revenue at presumably good margins, the helicopter trip is quite broad appeal. I mean, G'd Up, it skews male, so I don't know if my wife wants to go on a helicopter trip. She might go, oh, I'm not interested in that. But you can kind of see for the customer the core customers that are going after, like, oh, that's cool. Yeah. So I think these things should be as simple as possible. So what's really interesting is this sort of like elasticity factor when it comes to discounting and sales stimulation. And what we're trying to do is give the customer the smallest amount of discount possible to stimulate the most amount of revenue, aren't we?
Where's that sweet spot?
Well, the sweet spot's changing. The sweet spot now is not really much of a sweet spot because what's happened is it's actually now something like 4 or 5 times more discounting to stimulate the same level of sales that we were seeing only maybe 10 years or so ago.
Really?
Yeah.
It's dropped that much?
Yeah, it's dropped significantly, and we've got some really good data to support this. But what it says is that a lot of sales promotions now are unprofitable because we're having to put so much extra value in terms of a discount in front of the customer to get them to spend that we're giving away all of our margin. And this is really important. It's like we want to be able to continue to generate our top line. We want to be able to sell through. We don't want stock sitting on the shelves or in the warehouse. We need to be able to keep selling, but we can't do that at at unsustainable levels of discounting. We're left with no margin, and you would see that everyone knows that there's always a deal. Like, not many brands have been able to sort of like resist the urge to do price promotions. And, right now where there's a lot of challenge out there in e-com land and in retail, there's heaps of deals out there. So this is where it's really important that we, have a strong sense of what are the best types of promotions to stimulate revenue. And price promotion is less effective than it's ever been because customers just go, yeah, I can get that deal anywhere. We're just used to a deal. That's where if you have other incentives, other forms of stimulants for sales, points and cashbacks and helicopter flights and those sort of things, if you get that right, they cost you less than a big discount and they're more effective at stimulating sales.
Okay, so instead of giving away 100 grand by doing a 30-40% sale of margin, it's like let's invest 50 grand in an experience, or let's do a giveaway, or let's do something else exciting.
Yeah, and it could just be how you structure your price promotions as well. As opposed to a discount, it could be if you spend this amount, you get this on your next transaction. If you hit this threshold, then there's an incentive waiting for you. So it doesn't necessarily always need to be a competition, or it doesn't even need to be points. In some cases, those things work well. It's actually creating more levers in your promotional sort of artillery that work across the different priority customer segments that you have to ensure that you've got those things working in concert to maximize revenue and preserve your margin. And what's really important is that you try to avoid those things compounding each other.
If you were to have a tiered system, one which is like, I can save money. 2, which is like, if I buy now, I get this extra thing, like a gift with purchase or something cool. 3, I go in the draw to win. Do you find that any of these levers are more, I guess, strong than others, broadly speaking?
There's a couple of really interesting things going on here. Number one, though, is what we're seeing through a lot of the analysis is that customers care more about something that they have to earn over something that they are given. So think about this in terms of something that you've worked for, something that you've saved for, even something like if you accumulate like lots of velocity points, you really it matters to you a lot how you spend them.
Like, I've earned this.
Yeah, that's right. There's like a whole lot of attachment to the process of accumulating those. So you might have 100,000 velocity points sitting there, and you've worked hard to accumulate those. Depending upon how you redeem them, they might be worth $500 or $600 or $700 worth of cash equivalent. What we see is that customers actually and members actually who are engaged in that program, they actually would rather spend their hard-earned cash ahead of burning their hard-earned points.
Why?
Well, because there's a whole lot of emotional connection to that accumulation, and
is it because people spend money every day, but they don't accumulate points every day?
I think that we've got less. Of course, we don't want to sort of. Of course, we have emotional connection, connectivity to our money, our cash, but there just seems to be a higher degree of affinity when it comes to the points that I've worked so hard to accumulate. And isn't that just fascinating? Like $500 in cash is like, that's real tangible money, and we've got this synthetic currency of points.
It's like fiat currency.
Yeah,
You're like, I don't want to spend that.
Well, it is and it isn't. Fortunately, the regulator forces the these businesses to account for it in the balance sheet. So there is real money sitting behind it, but you've got an intangible virtual currency that is worth more in the customer's mind in terms of how they get utility out of it than their own hard-earned dollars.
That's crazy to me. Like, I guess I'm thinking back to like my Amex points, because as I was accumulating my points on my Amex, I was like, let's just be real careful about how we spend that, but let's throw money at this other thing. Yeah. I didn't even think of that until you pointed this out. It's like, I don't even know why I did that, but it seemed like maybe in my mind, it's more scarce as a resource.
Yeah.
Whereas money seems like something I can get infinitely if I go work hard. But it's like, well, I can't just get infinite Amex points unless I just spend money. But this whole thing is a bit of a short circuit in my brain. You make a good point with that, because if you could create an alternative currency through your brand, you're kind of creating a somewhat cult-like status where people don't want to spend it, they want to preserve it.
That's right. But it's not like money is easy to get either.
No.
We work really hard to earn money, yet we spend that more easily than we do our hard-earned loyalty points.
It's crazy.
But this phenomenon is true when the customer gives a shit and cares about the loyalty points. In a lot of, if they don't care about your program, they just let them expire, they let them break. But when you can be the program that the customer cares about, you get this hugely irrational behavior change because of them.
A couple questions in closing here. What are some musts that a program has to have included in it?
The very simple answer to that is rewards that customers care about. There's the means to the end is the accumulation and the incentives, the pathway that you make customers go through to get a reward. But ultimately, they need to care about that being something that they want. I mean, Mecca does this really well with their beauty boxes. People love those beauty boxes, and the higher tier you are, the better they are. And it really creates this sort of fabulous kind of like flywheel where a Mecca customer will always only ever shop at Mecca because they're on this pursuit for an ever better beauty box. It's a great reward.
Yeah, because if you take G'd up, it's like sports cars, helicopters, and parties with hot girls. Whereas Mecca, it's about getting this status box, like I get the box you can't have.
Yeah.
Whereas Ferrari, it's like access to exclusive club-like events.
Yeah.
So you're saying you need to tap into people's, I guess, desirability to have status, desirability to have access to things others don't, to maybe get some kind of reward framework.
Well, it's working out what the customers care about and what they'll change their behavior for, and putting that in front of them in a way that your competitors can't, so that creates that affinity for preference. Ultimately, it creates then the behavior change we're looking for, because the customer, more than just buying the product at a good price, there's something else on offer.
And one last question in conclusion here. What's a quote or a mantra that you've carried with you on this journey that if you could immediately bestow upon our listeners to immediately implement, what might that be?
I quote my best mate Tim for one of these. These sort of programs should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. So there's an unavoidable amount of complexity when it comes to putting these things together, but we can't overcomplicate them unnecessarily. But my favourite one is that in loyalty, the costs are real. It's easy to add it up. It's easy to spend money, but the uplifts are a promise. Spend that money today on the promise that customers are going to change their behaviour in the future. And so anyone out there that's doing loyalty, you've got to be a bit careful. It's easy to spend the company's money back on things that customers might want, but do you have confidence that the headroom, the value pools that we're trying to unlock are going to turn up? And I think that if you do, then great, go down that journey, but you've got to make sure you understand how to measure it and how to attribute it. And when you get that right, it becomes a hugely profitable, great commercial driver of the business. So it's good fun, and good luck to anyone out there that's going on that journey. If you need a hand, we can help you, but welcome to the loyalty industry. It's kind of, it's a weird, quirky thing, but it's really cool. It's there's lots of things going on. There's data, technology, analytics, loyalty finance, marketing, and the list goes on. So no one's really an expert. There's so much to unpack, but if you get it right, the returns are worth it.
Especially right now, I think we're in a market where people need to get creative. They need to explore things that they've never thought about before. And as far as your services go, what we'll make sure we will do is in all of the descriptors, we'll put in links so people can reach out to you and make contact with Ellipsis and speak to you and your team. And I think what you're doing out here is exceptional. You've worked with some of the biggest players in the industry. And I think that loyalty programs aren't something I've ever really honestly thought about. And even now I'm trying to think about, like, can I throw a dinner? Can I invite our clients to come to an event? Can I run some type of competition if they refer business to us? I'm thinking in my mind how to get a bit more creative about that myself. So, but yeah, if anyone's listening to this and wants to engage with you, we'll make sure that they can find you.
Thanks, Dane. This has been good, mate.
This has
Thanks
been a
for
ton of
having
fun,
me on,
man.
mate. I've enjoyed it.
I think there's so many more things I wish I had the time to unpack, but we'll certainly extend the olive branch and get you back again. And I've just found this extremely insightful and just thought provoking about how people are, finding currency that a company can create more valuable than their own money. And I think there's something there that I want to figure out for ourselves and how we can utilize. But I just appreciate you being here, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you, mate. My pleasure.